there's only so much other research out there. So if you're not doing your own research as a brand, you likely get stuck using the same data and insights as everybody else. So your content isn't actually differentiated. When brands invest in research in their industry, it actually builds a lot of trust. They see you as an expert and an authority.
Hi, welcome to Go-to-Market Playmakers, where we bring you winning go-to-market strategies from the industry's best. Each episode, we sit down with B2B tech and SaaS founders, executives, and industry playmakers who've mastered the art of taking products and services to market, as well as growing them within market. Whether you're scaling a startup, refining your go-to-market motion, or driving revenue growth through a channel program or partner ecosystem, this is where you'll learn the plays that work. I'm your host, Jeremy Bayless. Today's theme is B2B content strategy. I'm very excited because I'm joined by Becky Lawlor from Redpoint Content, an original research and content marketing agency. She has over a decade of experience helping B2B tech brands create thought-leading content that elevates their market presence and brand recognition. She's worked with brands like Adobe, IBM, Zapier, and many, many others. This is such a fascinating conversation because she is using original research to create content marketing strategies that are highly, highly effective. She is enabling brands to advance their message using data that they are either pulling from research that they're gathering from prospective customers, from customers, or just general audiences, or research that is sourced internally within the organization to tell meaningful stories. It's creating incredible outcomes. Let's get straight into it. Hey, Becky, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Jeremy, I'm really excited to be here.
I've really been looking forward to this conversation. I think what you're doing, what you're focusing on, what you've been putting out to market, I think is so fantastic and relevant to tech executives and founders and leaders. Before we get into all things content strategy, could you tell me a little bit about where you've come from and how you've gotten to where you are today?
Sure. I started out as a freelance writer. I've always been focused on thought leadership, like longer form content. And part of my journey there, I'm in the B2B tech space specifically, was any freelancer who probably works in a niche knows that sometimes it gets hard to, for all your different clients, you start to feel like they're still all kind of circling the same industry trends or topics. How do I differentiate this content? So, I mean, honestly, so I, as a writer, am not bored, as well as the audience I'm sending it out to. And I think one of the first chances I had to work on an original research type of content was working with Adobe, and everybody probably knows Adobe does a ton of their own original research, and so they gave me a data set, and I just like instantly fell in love with that type of content. I found it interesting. I was excited that here I was going to write a piece and nobody else would have this unique information, this data. I really enjoyed kind of doing the data storytelling with it. So that's what kind of set me on the course to eventually figure out how to do this myself. Because I wanted to be able to shape. I didn't want to just get the data because one thing I found over time is sometimes you get data, and honestly, sometimes if it's not done right, you don't have great data to work with. You just have some miscellaneous data points, or you don't have interesting data. So I really wanted to be in the start of the project where I could help shape the research strategy and the narrative that we were going to tell from the data. So I actually worked with a mentor who used to run Content Marketing Institute's annual benchmark report. She's no longer there, but she did that for years. And I kind of just did a one-on-one with her to really train in how to do all these pieces. I learned every step, but I brought on like data analysts and survey programmers and things like that to work with me because I feel like it's important to have people that are really specialized in different areas of the process, but work closely together about kind of how to bring out the topics and angles from the data with my analysts. So that's kind of how I got to where I am. So I've been running more of the what I call micro agency Redpoint for about 4 to 5 years, where I've been doing this kind of research for clients specifically.
I think that's an awesome segue because you're really enabling organizations to tell narratives and how they are themselves going to market and advancing either their brand story or their engagement, but they're using narratives that are structured from data and feedback. You, in your own research, you found that original research published by brands has the biggest impact with B2B buyers. Why do you think that is? What's that data telling you?
I think it's a couple things. One thing is, again, kind of going back to my own origination story, there's only so much other research out there. So if you're not doing your own research as a brand, you likely get in this stuck in this where you have to you're using the same data and insights as everybody else. So your content isn't actually differentiated. Your competitors are citing the same stats you are. Or sometimes I've even seen you're stuck citing competitors' stats because that's the only one out there and you need it to validate, the same way they need it. So that's one piece of it is that you just simply aren't offering something differentiated enough for people to care about unless you're actually doing your own research and really delivering something new to them. But the other thing about that is, I think, you know, people want to know what their peers are doing. They want to know like benchmarking. They want to know how they're stacking up, where they're falling behind, where they might be ahead. I mean, that's just like a human curiosity thing, right? Like we're always comparing ourselves, whether it's a good or bad thing. I think that's just innately a human trait. And I think the other piece is when brands invest in research in their industry, it actually builds a lot of trust. And that was another stat that came out of this is that it builds trust from buyers. They see you as an expert and an authority in a way that they don't see brands that aren't investing. I think partially like they appreciate that somebody's, doing the research for their industry where that data may not exist, where that knowledge may not be there unless somebody does the research. So that is another piece of it as well.
That's really interesting. I'm going to focus on that last part first, the eliciting of trust or building trust with your audiences through publishing original data and research. Do you think that the audiences recognize that this is original research specifically? Are they associating a tech brand with the data that they're publishing, or is it the constant access to relevant and meaningful data that elicits the trust because they're engaging with that brand more often on socials and wherever else they're consuming that data? Or is it maybe a combination of all of that?
I think it's a combination of both, but I do think your first point, the answer is actually a strong yes. I mean, if you think about like
Mhm.
brands like Salesforce, I think they're a perfect example. They do like their annual state of marketing report or whatever. I think people associate actually the brand Salesforce with investing in that industry research. And that's, part of how they really built that trust in the marketplace is through doing that research. And if you think about most companies that have a strong trust in their industry in their market space, most of them, if you really look at it, are probably doing their own research.
Yeah, interesting.
And I want to hit on one quick point there, if you don't mind, is
Yeah.
also I think it's important to say their own research because one of the things that I looked at, and mainly because I was a myth that I believed was out there, and I wanted to see whether or not my hypothesis was true or not, is I think a lot of brands think that they have to have third party research that has to come from an analyst firm, a consulting firm, maybe a big academic institution and I think it's also a barrier. Some brands think, well, that's just, those are hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't have that kind of budget for that kind of research.
Right.
But actually, so one of the questions I asked in my own research of B2B buyers was, how important is it that your research comes from a third party or from a brand, like that it's brand owned? And the response was about equal 50% just didn't care one way or the other who did it. But of that other 50%, a higher percent said they trusted brand owned research actually more than third party research. And I did have a follow-up question to that, just an open-ended one, because I was curious if people did say one or the other why. And what I found, which actually makes sense, is, one, everybody knows it, they're your buyers aren't dumb. They know that if you're doing a third-party research, they actually know you're still paying that third party for the research. So the folks that said they didn't trust third parties, they said, well, they're just getting paid to do what the brand says. And those that trusted the brand more said, their reputation is on the line here because they're going to own the research. So they felt like they would need to have more credibility. They also felt like the brand themselves actually would know the space better to be able to do better research. So it turned out in the end that if you're going to, you can certainly go with a third party. It's not terrible, but I just wanted to break the myth that you have to have a third party. And I think there's a ton of advantages actually to doing it brand owned and just stamping your brand on it, and becoming a brand that your audience looks for to do an annual, kind of big report or even quarterly. That was another thing we saw in the data is that most people actually wanted brands to be publishing original research quarterly versus annually. They wanted more, not less.
That's really surprising to me, particularly because I would think, as you mentioned, that a lot of leaders are trying to dispel any sense of bias by bringing in that research firm. It's really surprising for me to hear that the audiences actually don't really care, but also at the same time would assume that the biases is the direct result of the commercial terms of that relationship. Do you see organizations publishing the totality of the research as a supporting measure to take that on? Or is it the analysis alone is sufficient to for the reader to just dispel any sense of bias at all?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know of any brands that are publishing the research in the totality. One, because it's a little challenging to do that in terms of a publication. Now, for example, I actually had a few people reach out to me privately and say, I'd love to see, the data in terms of they were just more curious. And I was like, you know what? I've published the report. It's out there and I'm happy to share the raw data. And you can, if you wanted to look at your own industry, so you could kind of sort it like that, essentially cross tab. So I shared that out to a few folks that reached out to me. And that allows them to not only validate that the data that I said is correct, but also to look at it from their very own unique angle. And one of the things I've looked into but haven't yet done with a client, but I think I'm hoping the right opportunity and the right tool becomes available is I think with AI, we're seeing more of these kind of chatbots where you could actually upload your whole data set into the chatbot and then people can query it. So similarly, like when you go to publish your report, you can't, there's just no way you could share. I mean, when I do the data analysis for clients and I'm culling the crosstabs that I've done internally, I'm still often sharing 80 to 100 PowerPoint slides with them. And then we still have to shape the narrative from there. And you have to, pick and choose what you're going to share. But I think it would be great as with especially AI as a tool to do this, if it could really serve it up in a very kind of easy way, if it could create charts that people can easily understand and allow them to go in and say like, okay, I have this whole data set, but I'm in the healthcare industry and I just want to know what the data was for just folks that were in the healthcare industry versus broadly, or I'm, I'm in this role and I want to know how people in my role responded versus all the other roles that were surveyed or whatever it is. So that I think is a really cool possibility that's out there. Like I said, I've looked at a few tools, but I haven't actually done that piece with a client yet, and I haven't really found a tool that I felt was perfect for that yet. But I continue to kind of keep an eye on that.
Yeah, yeah. With data sets like that, we're not talking about simple little multiple choice surveys that take someone a couple of minutes, right? You're doing something much more expansive and extensive in these research pieces. Could you tell me a little bit about the breadth of what the research might seek to undertake?
Yeah, it actually does depend. I do pulse surveys with folks, which are really more like just 1 to 2 minute surveys, like 10-ish questions. One, just because it's a great way, like if you don't have a lot of budget and you're just trying to get buy-in for the first time in your organization for this, um, it's great. You get to dip your toe in at like a lower cost, lower price point, and you can also get the other piece of it is it's a pulse survey. So if you're also trying to hit a trend that just is like popped up and you want it quickly, obviously you could do that kind of survey. Every piece of it's just a little bit less effort and work, so you can move faster and get the data back faster and get to market faster. But most of the research I do is more in depth. It's typically about 30 questions. They still are only like 5 to 7 minute surveys. And the reason for that is if you go beyond that, you're going to actually, your data quality is going to suffer. Even if people complete the survey, like a longer one, um, the human tendency is to start getting really bored with it, is to start like wanting to be done with it, to start just clicking answers versus carefully, thoughtfully reading and responding. So, um, I feel like 5 to 7 is the right length. Occasionally, we might go a little bit longer if there's a real compelling reason to add a few more questions, but I'd say, if you think you have a 20-minute survey, what you really have is 2 surveys that need to be run, like, shorter, and I think it's also important as part of this process to really think about this goes back to understanding your goals, understanding, having a story that you're trying to tell instead of trying to just the process could get, where you get too many clicks in the kitchen. Everybody's like, oh, I want to know this and I want to know this. And this stakeholder wants to know this. And you have to step back and say, okay, one, that's all internal knowledge. What are we doing this for? What does our audience care about? And what questions do we, really, you need to put those constraints on you so you get the strongest, most interesting data too.
I like how you phrase that as constraints because I think maybe there's a misperception in content like this or the pursuit of content like this that we will let the data guide us to understand what the narrative will be, but you're really creating a framework to work within to understand what the data will say as opposed to it just being more broad, right? You're needing to have parameters or guardrails on what it is you're researching rather than just keeping it all open ended.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I have seen actually several times people come to me after they run run their survey and they have their data and they're like, "Help me." And I have to say sometimes, "I'm sorry, it's actually too late to help you at this point because you didn't start out thinking about the narrative." Um, and I see this a lot of time. You need to, if you're doing it in house or with a partner, if you're doing it with a partner, I've seen a lot of people turn to like market research firms, which are great at market research. But what we're doing here is for content marketing. And so you really, and a content piece is a story, right? It's a narrative. So obviously you don't know what the data is going to say for sure. You have hypotheses, but I always, before we, as part of like designing the survey and before we fill the survey, I create what's called like a storyline narrative. So based on what we know about the space and, as a brand, you should know your customers in the industry. You should have some, hypothesis that you feel pretty confident about. There may be some like, when I asked that question about brand owned versus third party, I really didn't know what the outcome was gonna be. I had a hypothesis myself that this was a myth, but I didn't know for sure, and so I think it's great to put some of those questions in where you're like, "I really don't know which side of the coin this is gonna fall on, but I'm really curious, and it would make a good story, if it falls this way. If it doesn't, then I'll own that and accept that." Um, so I think you're thinking about all of that, but you also have to think like, okay, if our hypotheses don't go the way we plan, if we are surprised by something, what's that narrative? You need to be asking all these questions right at the beginning so that when the data comes back, you do have still a compelling narrative, whether it comes out the way you really hoped it would, or if it comes out totally opposite of what you thought it would.
That's so insightful. For me, what I really picked up on there is the true purpose is content marketing. The the vehicle that content marketing presents is brand engagement, trust eliciting, as well as nurturing potential prospects and a whole other sales enablement type activities. It's not really to glean information so as to shape our product strategy or to shape our culture strategy or to get an understanding of something else that isn't directly related towards advancing the brand. That's really poignant the way that you've articulated that.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize because I see it over and over that it's really important for marketers that are going to do this with, if the goal is content, then you really need to make sure that either how you approach it or how your partner, if you're using a research partner, approaches it is from a content marketing perspective because again, how you write those survey questions also matters. People often think that the survey is the easy part. It's actually the most crucial and the most difficult part. But again, if you have to think about how to not bias the questions, but you also want to think about what's going to make an interesting headline. What is going to be an interesting message? Asking somebody to rate something on a scale of 1 to 5, I had one, they were just a content client I'd had forever, and I don't know who somebody else in the organization had some firm do this research, and then the marketer came to me and said, "I just got this spreadsheet, this Excel spreadsheet, I need and I'm tasked to, like, make content from it. Can you help me?" And I went and looked at the survey that had been run and the spreadsheet, and I was like and I had my analyst, I was like, "Just do this for free. This is an old client of mine. I've had him forever, but I'm not seeing anything. Can you just run a few of these and see if I'm right here?" And she did, and, like, every single question was on a scale of 1 to 5, and that was it. There was no in-depth kind of responses to elicit more insights, and I was like, "You know what? Honestly, everybody answered 4 or 5 on your scale. You have no trends, you have no patterns, you have no story." I said, I'm not I can't. I'm sorry. You're kind of in a bad bind. You're gonna have to go back to your CMO and say you paid for all this research and there's not really anything you can do with it. There's no way to craft a story out of the way the survey was written. There's just not really an insight at all in there."
You're putting words to scenarios that I've experienced as well in my past, so I'm grateful for the camaraderie in this. Um, do you also experience scenarios where sales gets involved and wants direct questioning that might lead to conversations in a sales sense? Reason why I ask is the more stakeholders that get involved in marketing activities to drive direct lead gen or to use as an opportunity for outreach, is that something that you have to push up against as well to keep the data relevant and meaningful for a content marketing strategy as opposed to direct sales outcomes?
Yeah, I haven't had sales so much get involved in it, although I it's not that, I actually think that the marketing team needs to be thinking about sales enablement content from it, so I think they should be having some conversations with sales. I've actually seen more often it's product marketing that, maybe starts asking, like, they want more insights for product development,
Okay.
but
Yep.
the way that I set up and work with clients is right from the get-go, one of the first questions I'm asking are like, "What are your goals with this, research?" And again, I'm coming from a content, so we're always working from content, but, is it PR? Is it lead gen? Is it SEO? Is it all of these equally? How are we gonna balance those out? If it's PR, we really wanna think about what headlines, what publications do you really wanna get it in? What do they care about? What are they publishing on? What topics? If it's lead gen, then let's think about your target audience. What would be most appealing to them? And let's focus the research. So that's the very first discussion. And then that helps me hold the line and helps me with my point of contact, hold the line with the stakeholders when they start kind of tossing in, well, I want to know this and I want to know this. And I can say in a 30, like if we're doing a more in-depth one, like a 30 question survey, I can say, yeah, we can give them 1 or 2 questions. Maybe that's just internal knowledge. We can, have a few in there just for you guys internally. But we want to make sure that overall what we're doing here is achieving our goal and that we've got the right questions to achieve the outcomes that we set out. I'm very outcome and result focused. I want to make sure that the clients are hitting the KPIs that they want to hit with this. And so, but I think when you set those outcomes at the beginning, it makes it much easier to then go to stakeholders and say, remember, PR is our outcome goal. So asking about, this product market fit, media doesn't care about that. So you can have one question or two questions if you want, but the other 27 are going to go, to the story we're building. So it makes it much easier to have those conversations. But again, you might ask sales like, you know, what I'll say is like, if you could have one or two dream stats, what would your dream stat be? Like, what would really help you sell this product? And again, I don't know for sure that we're going to get that dream stat, but then I'm happy again to have one or two questions that push towards their dream stats and we see what happens. And if they get it. So
Speaking of content marketing strategy, one of the shifts that we've seen, particularly in social media platforms, is that there is a ever reducing importance to the like and increasing importance to shareability. People resharing content, reposting it, or even moving it into, what some people are calling dark social and
right.
sharing content in community forums and or direct to DMs. That seems to be holding the most weight right now in organic performance for content. In what ways are people more compelled to share original research?
Right. Yeah, it just goes back to it really is more engaging. And I did ask this question in my own survey of B2B buyers. I had a whole bunch of different types of content, including like case studies, how to, educational type of content versus content that included, some form of original research, whether that was pure insights or survey based, and a bunch of different things. So, and overall, anything that included any types of the content that included original research were 2.5 times more likely to be shared, according to the respondents, that they were 2.5 times more likely to share it than other types of content. And they were 2 times more likely to share their personal data for that type of content than any other type of content.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think 2.5x is a pretty meaningful stat to pursue original research in your own content marketing, particularly with where things are going. I mean, if shareability is so critical, that seems to be very effective.
Yeah, and there's just, we haven't really dug into it, but there's just so many levels, I believe, of ROI from one piece of research and one project that you can get out of it. It really, to me, and this is part of the reason I went into it, because I just believed in it being such a strong piece of content that could really deliver results for my clients. Um, across the board, it helps with SEO and backlinks. We've already talked about like lead gen. If you're trying to get emails, in my opinion, it's probably about the only type of content um, these days that people are willing to actually hand over their email address for.
Mm.
PR, it typically does the best out of the different types of contents that you could try to get um, media interest in. But it's also great for like, we just got like, um, fueling your content strategy for a year. You get so many different topics and angles, and now you have the data and the stats to kind of dig into those angles. It's also great. I've had a lot of clients have success of giving the data to like their executive teams, and they've been able to get prestigious like speaking engagements at top trade shows or events or conferences in their industry that they actually couldn't get without having original research. So that's been another kind of place I think a lot of people don't think about value, but there's value even on the speaking circuit for your executives.
So that's incredible. There's a sort of centralized hero piece of content, the report, the analysis, but the wider benefit across all of those channels that you discussed, as well as I would assume in the way that you just described a year's worth of content, it itself gets I would imagine, broken up into bite-sized pieces of
Yep.
communication that can be dripped out over long periods of time, I assume.
Yeah, and it does well, like, most of my clients will say, one, if you've done research, most marketers you'll talk to will say that, yes, it was one of their highest performing assets, if not their highest performing asset. They'll say that, when you break it up, webinars or taking the data and having a webinar, um, every client I've had has had a lot of success with that. They've seen really high attendance and response rates to their webinars. And then again, like the social post engagement and all of that tends to be higher when you're sharing original research in it.
Yeah, that's so compelling. Want to ask you, the hottest topic that anybody's talking about right now is AI, and it would be a shortcoming to not bring it up here. But your research actually, and we'll link to your research in the show notes, but your own research is indicating that people don't mind AI generated content. That's a huge surprise to me. I would have specifically thought that if they were asked that overtly, that there would be a different response. But what do you think is driving this responses that your research elicited, that it's not really that big of a deal?
Yeah, I'll also admit that I actually totally expected this one to go the other way. So this is a example of where you think one thing and you get surprised by the results. And if I had to do it over, I would have had an open-ended why question on this one. I think I was so confident that they would say they didn't like AI that I didn't think about that. And that's part of doing it. You always learn, like, okay, next year or next time, this is what I would do differently. There's always learnings. But when I thought about it, based on everything else that my data is showing, what I think that they're really saying is they just don't care essentially how the sausage gets made. It's not that they are looking for generic AI content. What they're saying, because all the other data says we want in-depth analysis, we do want to see like case studies embedded in the content. We do want original research, and we want brands to invest in it a lot. But we don't really care how you get us quality content. And this is something like I've seen there's a ton of debates like on LinkedIn, like, oh, you know, and I've had subcontractors say to me, well, what AI, tool are you using to detect AI? And I say, like, I don't really care about that. And none of those are accurate anyway. What I want to know, if I'm hiring you to help write content for me and my clients, is can you write quality content? Is it interesting? Have you put in unique insights? Is it very readable? Is it engaging? Like, and I think at the end of the day, that's what B2B buyers are saying is they just don't care how you get there, but it still has to be good content. It has to be relevant to them. It has to offer them some insight they didn't have already. And I did have another open-ended question about, what type of content stands out. Like, it was kind of like, have you had content that stands out to you? And 50% said yes, and 50% said no. And of the 50% that said yes, I said, like, what made it stand out? And this was an open-ended question, but it essentially came down to like, I had a solution, I had a problem, and this piece of content actually had a solution that worked, or, they had unique insights for my industry, or, this case study was exactly solving the same thing I have. So it was very much about relevancy and new insights that they didn't have. And I think that's at the end of the day, and how it gets written up, whether that's AI helping you write it or you're writing it human only, I don't think that the audience cares about.
I'm so surprised that that's the outcome, but here we are. It's a new era, I think. If I'm a leader looking to elevate our content marketing into either driving more effectiveness or achieve other outcomes, in what ways are you advising them to start thinking about research in terms of relevance, in terms of practicality, in terms of opportunity? Where do you start that conversation?
Yeah, I think if I understand the question correctly, I mean, I start the conversation that if they haven't done it ever, if they've done it, they probably have know that it's effective. But then I think for a lot of people, I think the elephant in the room is like, oh, but it's expensive. I don't have the budget. I think there's a lot of marketers say, like, I know research works, and I'd like to invest in it, but I don't have the budget. And to that, I would say there's a lot of different ways to do research. We've been talking about survey-based research here, but it's not the only way to get original insights. If you have internal data, like mm, I have a client who's in call tracking, so they have internal call tracking data. We've anonymized that. Or I have a cybersecurity client. They are collecting kind of data around cybersecurity threats. They can then turn that around, anonymized, and share. And again, that comes back to like the benchmarking. They can share different benchmarks that companies in their industry can look at and say, like, okay, this is where like if you were on the call tracking, if you're a legal firm, you could say, okay, this is what they just shared all the industry stats for legal firms. Like they're missing X percent of calls. How many calls, what percentage of my calls am I missing? Am I missing more? Am I missing less? Do I need to improve on that metric? So, or like how much are they investing in, if you know different things, like how much are they investing in SEO or something, all of those things can be really insightful, anonymized. So I think looking at your own data and whether or not it can be externalized in some way is a great way to do that. It does still require some data analysis and there is some heavy lift, but if you have some kind of data science team, they can typically help you with that. Or again, you could get an outside vendor. You can also go out and do your own kind of taking a third party data set. Like I know an agency that they monitor 250 SaaS websites and then they put out an annual report of what they're seeing in terms of rankings on different kind of metrics they're looking at. Like in that report this year, there was one about original research that and looking at which brands on their websites had published original research and then where they were ranking on Google search and that those that actually had original research were ranking higher than those that didn't. And they had a whole bunch of other metrics too. That's the one that obviously I remember most. But so there are a lot of different ways to kind of go at this that don't have to be you know, expensive. And I would also argue that there's a lot of different, again, if you're not using a big research firm, there are a lot of other ways to do this a lot less expensive. It doesn't have to cost, you know, even 50,000 or 30,000 or whatever you think it costs. So,
Ultimately, the ROI and the outcomes are just phenomenal. It just compounds throughout the year, it sounds like.
yeah, I mean, that's what I've seen, and that's what my clients have seen is, like I said, most of them have seen significant engagement from this type of content. And the other piece is it also just helps you understand. It does, even when you're doing this type of content, even when it's not the goal, you do understand. You are asking about challenges and pain points to your target audience. So you do have some idea of what is going to be relevant to them, and can then create other content, even if it's not research based, that will be a little bit more on point and relevant because you just asked what they really are struggling with.
Yeah, interesting. That's given me so much to reflect on. Becky, this has been so awesome and so enlightening. Gonna encourage that listeners download your B2B buyers report. It's got so much data that we didn't even cover in this conversation. I've taken so much away from that report. Thanks for coming on the show and digging deep on the value of original research with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Awesome.